There's
Hello,
no table.
everyone. We're here today to talk about sustainability in fashion, and especially at a time when we're all looking at how best to put our finances to work, what sustainability means for the fashion industry, and also what it means for the consumers. And so I'm here today with two excellent guests who can introduce themselves in a second, but I'd like you to introduce yourselves also answering the question, consumers across the world are currently being squeezed. We're seeing a cost of living crisis. And I would like to know from you both whether you think now sustainable fashion can be as much an economic proposition as it is an ecological one.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So my name is Lucia. I'm part of Generation. Just as a brief background, Generation is a dedicated sustainable investing firm. We're founded 18 years ago, really with the belief that by incorporating sustainability in the investment process, you can generate better insights and over a long period of time actually generate better performance and superior performance for your investors. I'm actually part of our growth equity division, which focuses on investing in large scale companies that are really accelerating the transition to a more scalable economy. And Vestiaire is a great example. We have partnered with them since last year, but I've really followed them for a long period of time. So back to this question. So when we invested in Vestiaire, we spent a lot of time thinking about what is really the convenience that they bring to consumers, and we think affordability is a very big part of the equation, in addition to just enhances a more circular and more sustainable consumer behavior, which I think we'll address later. And in part, in relation to the convenience, we see it as like twofolds. In particular, sort of for the buyers, it helps create value out of clothing that might be sitting idle in your wardrobe, but also it very much helps seller provides a very quality product that is actually more convenient than buying a new item of clothing. We also spend a lot of time looking about the impact that a company has on an overall industry shift. And in particular, we believe that Vestiaire, by making it cool, appealing, and also more secure to buy second-hand clothing, has actually a pretty important role to play in just making second-hand overall just more appealing, safer, and in overall just changing the industry and fashion in general toward just a more sustainable end state. And so we think a lot about what are some of these long-term shifts that ought to happen for industries to become more sustainable, and what is the role that companies play in enhancing that shift. And we see very much, Vestiaire in the case in like fashion and higher end, items as very, very critical in enabling that shift.
Thanks, because it's very nice to be introduced like this. Before answering the question, I don't know how well you're hearing us, but I will ask you a question. Who knows Vestiaire Collective? Who ever buys second-hand? Wow. And who ever buy on Vestiaire Collective? That's great. I do too. So yes, I'm Dounia Wone, and I joined Vestiaire Collective, which is a global platform. It was created 13 years ago in Paris. But now we are across the globe, over 80 countries, and we have a community of 23 million people that just exchange, buy or sell items. What is the differentiator of Vestiaire among all our competitors is our business model and also our segmentation. So we choose to buy more, let's say, luxury and premium goods, rather than fast fashion or low quality item. And we also are different because trust is our biggest pillar. Trust is the way we manage to put people together, buying and selling luxury goods in a trusted environment. So for that, we have a business model where you will buy my bag, and you will, let's say it's a Chanel bag, and then it will go through authentication. And you have the second model where you have direct shipping, where I can send you, which is a more regular model, I can directly send my bag to you. And what the success of Vestiaire and what you were saying is that our vision and mission is really to change the way people consume fashion. And I'm not telling you that everyone who is buying today a fast fashion brand will actually buy a Hermes second-hand bag. That's not true. That's not what we believe in, but we believe in this upscale effect. So the first driver of our consumer is still affordability. We don't fool ourselves. It's not sustainability first, but we saw that sustainability is a driver that is now the second one and is growing super fast. 10% over the last 2 years. That brought to 40% this year in our last BCG studies. So yes, we see that it has an impact and it's changed the way people consume fashion, because whenever, and that's our responsibility, whenever you are on our platform, we will try to educate yourself and raise awareness on overconsumption, but we will talk about that. Overconsumption, and not just buying or selling, but more entering a loop where you buy and sell less, but better quality.
Actually, going off from that, I think it's important for us to touch on overconsumption as a focus, because the fashion industry, by its very nature, has an inherent factor of newness and the need for new styles. The seasons within fashion houses are an essential and integral part of a lot of fashion companies. And so if we're looking at how fashion itself can be sustainable, I think it's very valid to then ask as well, how can a company, Vestiaire is an example of this, but how can fashion companies more broadly develop and grow as companies while not also pushing overconsumption as an ethos to their consumers? And also, going on from that, it would be interesting to know also what tools those companies can use to continue to promote their products and continue to offer varieties of services to their customers without also promoting overconsumption.
I'll go first? Yeah. So at Vestiaire, as I was saying, we truly believe that we have to change the way we consume. So we believe that we can grow without this overconsumption craziness, the willing of newness every week, like in fast fashion. And what we saw, it's also the behavior of our community. So because of all the marketing messages, because of the strategy that we build for our consumer, we see that the substitution effect, for instance, so substitution effect is how much do you replace a first-hand purchase whenever you choose second-hand. So for us, it's 70%. 70% of substitution rate, which is pretty big compared to, and with same methodology studies, compared to previous study, which were always since 15 years around 50. That makes our community more engaged and more committed. So it's, you can say that it's still 30% remaining, but it's our role to work toward another consumption, and this is what we believe in.
Yeah, so at Generation, a lot of our sourcing actually comes from research. So we spend a lot of time understanding, what are some of the pain points the industry are going through, and what is like a more positive end state, and what are the players that lead to that. So in this case, our investment actually in Vestiaire came out of a broader piece of research around circular marketplaces. And in particular, we picked clothing as one where we saw a very strong pain point on emissions coming from new clothing production is equivalent to all international flights plus maritime transportation put together. And more importantly, there are just some worrying trends, like many more clothes being produced, people actually wearing clothes less, and therefore more items actually ending up in landfills or just sitting idle in the wardrobe. And so we actually made two investments in the space, in the broader space of circular marketplaces. So we have Vestiaire and also another company called Back Market, which is more in the circular refurbished electronics, which is clearly a different space. But we think sort of circularity has a very important role to play in just making fashion, but the overall consumption sort of pattern more sustainable. And so we talked about the role of sort of companies focusing on higher end and like more higher order value items in that, and the substitution effect. Clearly, and we looked at sort of exactly as Dounia was saying, 70% of consumers buying Vestiaire rather than a new item, and this is where sort of this substitution come into play, that you're really creating a truly more circular model. I think that we also look at sustainability in terms of like what a company does, and we talked about it, but also how a company operates. And in this case, I do think companies more broadly in this space have a very important role to play to influence consumers to just have a more circular pattern, but also like can buy more sustainably. So, and in this case, we saw Vestiaire being really a leader in that. So clearly, like the entire management team embraces sustainability as a core differentiator. And also have been very thoughtful around thinking about, for example, returns. Like, how do we manage returns? Like, how can we reduce the number of items returned? Or, for example, last mile logistics. So last mile logistics in e-commerce more broadly is like a very big source of emissions. So how can we enable more local matching, which then brings also convenience to the consumer, because you have ideally more supply in your marketplace, which benefits consumer because they have more choices, but also brings sustainability because you can avoid sort of long transportation routes. And so just having companies being very thoughtful around all of the sources of in this case footprint, or like an unsustainable consumer behavior like overconsumption, what can they do to positively influence behavior, I think is very important.
And in that case, we don't do returns because we do a lot
Yeah.
at the very beginning, so there is no need to return your item.
I think going off from that, it's also worth talking about not just the sustainability from the perspective of the relationship between the business and the consumer, but also, as you pointed to, how sustainability can also drive cost-saving measures within a company itself, and not just cost-saving, but also efficiencies as well. And would you both be able to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, at Vesta, for instance, one of our key example is how much we grow, while actually the more we grow, the more we get more sustainable. So as you know, e-commerce has, like you talk about shipments and deliveries, which is a big part of our impact, 60% today. But the more we grow, the more we're able to put in place the local-to-local approach. So basically, it's that you will see, so let's say that we are in Portugal, and if you're scrolling on Vestiaire Collective, you will have the Portuguese goods first, and then maybe the European, but the other continent last. So you have and you will have features on the platform that will lead you to the best sustainable choice every step of your consumer journey. So this local-to-local approach is also having local warehouses. So for instance, we have a warehouse in north of France for Europe, but now we have also warehouses in US and also in APAC. And the more we grow, the more we think about this local-to-local approach. So the country will be more autonomous. For instance, in Italy, you have a more seller profile, and in Germany, more buyer. But how can we make sure that we talk differently to those consumers so we increase the parts where we are a bit weak? So for instance, as there is a lot of seller in Italy, how do we attract and create that demand on buying? So they have good supply, and we need to find the buyer in the same area, so the goods will be closer to closer, and we will reduce the destination.
Yeah, I think just to add on what Dounia said, I think we spend a lot of time thinking about actually what is the value that sustainability investor, what is the value that we see in companies that others don't see, that others that don't necessarily focus on sustainability see. And also, what is the alignment between sustainability and financial? And we strongly believe that there is a very strong alignment. And how this translates into practice is, when the company grows and therefore improves their revenues and margin, what is actually the impact on sustainability? And in the case of, for example, Vestiaire, the two are very, very closely connected. One of our, we spend a lot of time thinking about sort of business model and business quality. And in this area in particularly, we wanted to invest in the leading player in the market, because these tend to be sort of winner-take-most business model where leadership just self-reinforces in terms of both the convenience that you bring to consumers, but clearly also financial, financial improvement. And so as simple as, for example, increasing your supply brings potentially more local matching, which also helps your margin. And so having this very close alignment between sort of sustainability and financial performance is exactly what gets us very excited. And we're seeing this across, both sort of consumer enterprise. We spend a lot of time also in enterprise where, for example, you have, software players that provide, companies with a better understanding of their energy footprint, which also gives them an ability to understand how can I actually save money by better, managing my energy footprint. And so again, more savings, more, less, footprint is more broadly sort of what we spend a lot of time thinking about.
And to wrap up, I just wanted to ask you a bit about the relationship between tech more broadly and e-commerce more broadly and green practices, because my impression is frequently when people talk about something being a tech solution, there is an assumption built in there that it is therefore more green than brick and mortar options. And I think e-commerce is a really interesting example of that, because essentially if something shows up at your door, you don't consider the full supply chain going into it in the same way as you would if you walk into a high street store and you can see the physical impact of all the clothes piled up and everything. And so I think it's worth also interrogating, what do you think the trade-off is when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to the balance between what an e-commerce platform like Vestiaire does and what you get from a brick and mortar business?
Yeah. No, so this is another area we spent a lot of time thinking about. We were one of actually the first investors in Ocado, for example, in the grocery space. And our original thesis was that actually e-commerce is more efficient and bring convenience not only to the consumer, but also as a lower carbon footprint. And so we actually we published an article actually specifically on this, where we actually went down a research path with a number of scientists and researchers in the space to really understand what is the footprint of e-commerce versus brick and mortar. And the finding was that at scale, so if you compare sort of scale e-commerce with scale brick and mortar, e-commerce actually consumes 70% less greenhouse gas emissions. And we looked at it across transportation, buildings, data, and packaging. And I think one of the most important factors here is buildings, just the fact that heating, cooling, and lighting to maintain buildings for brick and mortar is the source of probably great air emission. That said, you can see actually the equation tipping over on the other side if e-commerce is done badly. So, and in particular, for example, if logistics is very badly managed with lots of long-distance transportation, if high returns are happening. And so it is definitely not a one-size-fits-all, but it has to be defined in just better practices. And I think generally e-commerce has a very big role. E-commerce companies have a big role to play to just enable a more efficient operation. So again, be very thoughtful about last mile logistics, enabling more local matching, lowering returns, but also offering sort of more circularity. I mean, Vestiaire is a great, clearly example. And there's just a lot more they can do really to tip the equation over to even being more convenient and more efficient.
And on our side, so yes, we are an e-commerce player, but we are a bit spoiled because, like, for instance, the fact that we don't produce anything lower our impact very, very, very much. Buying a second-hand item is 90% less impactful than buying a first one in the first place. But then when you go into our own organization and when we see our own impact, we still have an impact because of delivery, because we are a tech platform, because we have operation, because we make people work in a building. So yes, basically as a company we do. But we are working in a way, so aligned with our SBTi framework. But basically what we are working on is reducing our own impact while maximizing our avoided emission. And today, in our last carbon assessment, we understood that we were avoiding twice the amount of emission that we generate. So without offsetting, it makes us a climate net benefit to the fashion industry, which is super huge for us. But still, we still have work to do because, as we were saying before, and that's what's the beauty of Vestiaire Collective, is that the more we will grow, the more we will align our climate strategy with our operation and our growth, the more we will keep reducing that carbon emission without buying trees all across the world.
Just quickly to wrap up, I just wanted to ask you, how do you manage to communicate sustainability in fashion as something which is going to be accessible to a broader consumer base? Can I just ask you quickly what you think of that?
I guess it's how you want to invest in your wardrobe. And so our role is to raise awareness. But then as a consumer, it's just like, look at your wardrobe, and do you want to buy 18 pair of jeans per year at $20? Or do you want to invest in maybe 2 or 3 jeans and that will last a long time, maybe forever? So it's how you consider yourself as an investor when you shop, or as a spender that will just put your money literally out of the window.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.